Dr. Alejandra, welcome. It's such an immense pleasure to speak with you today.
Thanks for inviting me to your podcast. I'm very happy to be here.
Dr. Alejandra, as a medical doctor and a neurologist, what has surprised you the most about the brain throughout your career?
Wow. So I will say there's been two stages. When I was in medical school and I was a young doctor, I was fascinated, and still, of course, I'm fascinated about how our brain gives us our identity. Our brain, it's the organ that tells us who we are, what do we love, how our life has been. And at the beginning of my medical career, I was fascinated about how, with some diseases like dementia, for example, or even a stroke, you can lose that identity if your brain is not functioning. For me, that is one of the biggest miracles and mysteries, because still we don't have fully understand of how our brain and our identity works. And that's actually what pushed me to study neurology, because I wanted to understand how the brain was working, why we were losing, or why people were losing their identity and their self when they had these conditions or these diseases. But then later in my path as a neurologist, I discovered that we focus on disease and we don't focus on health. So I pivot and I change this emphasis on trying to understand what happens when we get sick. And now my focus is how can we avoid to get sick? And how can we protect that brain that gives us the identity? Because one thing is treating or diagnosing something that already happened, and when it happens, it's too late. How can we avoid and prevent these things from happening? Because before 20 years ago, that wasn't possible, or that wasn't in the books. It was something like, if you will have it, you will have it, and sorry, and there's nothing we can do about it. Now the narrative has changed, and now there is hope about all these diseases and about all these conditions. And now this is the thing that excites me the most about the brain.
Research is showing that Alzheimer's is actually a midlife disease and that symptoms only show up decades later. What preventive actions would you suggest that our audience take today, whether they're maybe in their 30s or 40s or their 50s, in order to keep their identity later in life?
Yeah. So the most important window for Alzheimer's prevention is midlife, because in midlife we have the sum of all these risk factors that are preventable conditions or reversible conditions or conditions associated with lifestyle, that if we work on them, we will be able to prevent Alzheimer's disease. The research that we know nowadays is that about approximately 45% of dementia cases can be prevented if we treat these risk factors. In the risk factors that we have for Alzheimer's disease, for example, there is obesity, there is smoking, there is high blood pressure, there is high sugar, there is excessive consumption of alcohol or tobacco, there is physical inactivity, there is traumatic brain injury, high cholesterol. And if you see, all these conditions are lifestyle related. If we have a healthy diet, if we move our body and do exercise, if we have this healthy lifestyle, we could prevent all these conditions that in late life will cause Alzheimer's disease.
I want to touch on another type of research that actually suggests that our brain actually perceive our future self as a stranger or as a separate person. And this has been actually shown when people basically are put within brain scans, and it's really, really fascinating. And when we think about this research and when we understand what you have just shared, what advice would you have for our listeners who may want to start prioritizing their future self but the way the brain works prevents them to fully embrace consistent practices that are healthier for their brains.
So, one thing that we need to understand is that the future is not written yet, and that we can always change at any time, at any age. Change is possible, but we need to do our work and we need to put some effort. And the effort, it's only consistency. We need to be consistent with small habits, and these small habits will compound over time and they will create a healthy lifestyle. So, for example, the number one problem that we have is physical inactivity. What people usually do is that they go to the gym during January, no? So they pay the gym subscription and they go and they lift weights and they go to all the classes for 3 weeks, 4 days a week, and then nothing. You see the effect on the gyms. January is full of people, and then February some people, and in March there's no one. It's 50, less than 50% of the people that were in January. So this type of change is not sustainable in time because we cannot go from 0 to 4 days a week training and doing exercise. It's easier to start with something small. Start walking. Start walking for 10 minutes. Then you will say, like, okay, 10 minutes sounds like nothing. Let's go for 20 minutes. Then 20 minutes, I feel fine. I can do 30 minutes. And over time, this will compound. And then you will say, okay, I feel like walking it's maybe boring. I can do something more. Let's jog. And then from jogging, you will end up running. And then running, you will be even running marathons. Who knows? But this is a process that takes time. And we have to we have to be flexible with these things. We cannot change things overnight, but we can do these small actions day by day that will lead us to a healthy lifestyle.
Highly encourage all. Tell us a little bit more what happens at the level of the brain when we exercise beyond the long-term benefits that it has.
Okay, so in the short, exercise is the best thing that we can do for our brain and for our mental health, because in the short term it increases the endorphins, and endorphins are these chemicals and these molecules that makes us happy, just like that, and also increases dopamine. So we feel lighter, we feel happier, and we stop overthinking. For example, for a moment you forget about everything and you just focus on the present moment, on your heartbeat, on breathing, or taking energy to continue. So this time, the exercise at the short term releases all these chemicals and also gives you the time to pause and to focus only on the moment. Because if you are doing like a good cardio exercise, or if you are lifting heavy weights, you have to focus on that. There's no other thing that you cannot be thinking about emails, notifications, tasks to do if your heart is pounding and you are sweating. So it's giving us this push, this pause during the day. And in the long term, it increases the BDNF, which is the fertilizer for our neurons. And before, we thought that the forming new neurons was impossible, that you were born with an amount of neurons and that was it. And they were dying during time. But now we know that with exercise, it's possible to grow new neurons. And these new neurons grow specifically in the hippocampus, which is the area for memory. And this hippocampus is the first area that gets affected with Alzheimer's disease. So if you train, you will have a stronger hippocampus, you will have new neurons. Your chances of getting these types of diseases is less.
Amazing. And is there a difference at the level of the brain between cardio exercises versus lifting weights?
Yes, yes and no. We have to, as a whole, exercise is good. All exercise, all movement is good, and we have to encourage, like even walking is good for the brain. But if we go more for the biochemical aspect of exercise, the effect is kind of different. For cardio exercise, it increases BDNF, which is the fertilizer for the neurons. And muscle training, strength training, increases the communication between the muscles and the brain. So we know that when we are training, there's a chemical code called the myokines, and these chemicals are released by the muscle, and they go to the brain, and they make the brain stronger with this communication between the muscle brain axis. So that's why it's important to do both.
Let's talk now about the impact of negative stress on the brain, and particularly what is the impact when we are exposed to long term stress that we cannot seem to manage.
Okay, so chronic stress is the bad one. And when we have chronic stress, the level of cortisol is always high. We all have cortisol in our bodies. Cortisol itself is not bad because we need it for our lives, and it goes up and down in different cycles. The problem is that when we have chronic stress, it stays up. And it stays up, it damages different things, but specifically in the brain, it goes to the hippocampus. The hippocampus is this very sensitive area that whenever something is going wrong, the hippocampus is the one that it's going to suffer. So this huge amount of cortisol in the hippocampus shrinks the hippocampus. And this is the area for memory, and this is the area for Alzheimer's disease, the first area that gets affected with Alzheimer's disease. This is one of the effects. And that's why when we are stressed or when we are in long-term stress, we tend to forget things. And the other aspect is that this increased amount of cortisol also affects the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is the one that helps us make better decisions and the one that helps us to solve problems. So if this amount of cortisol is high, we take bad decisions, our reasoning is worse. And over time, this leads to anxiety, depression, and everything becomes like a snowball. Because then you will have memory problems, you will have mood problems, and this is what we see in midlife people all the time. People that are in their working ages between 30 to 60 with high demanding jobs, all of them are suffering from memory problems and mood problems. And it's because of this.
So, how can a person effectively manage their stress level? Because there's also good stress, right? That brings excitement, enthusiasm. There's also a curiosity linked to maybe doing something new. What are the best tools, in your opinion, to track day in and day out the levels of stress that we actually experience and may not necessarily have that self-awareness to truly understand how negatively it is impacting us?
Okay, so the first thing is that there's no blood test for this, because in some cases people are suggesting taking levels of cortisol, but cortisol varies during the day. So this won't show, like if you do the cortisol test and you have high cortisol and you say like, oh, my cortisol is high, I'm going to die. No, it's not like that because it works in cycles. So not blood test. But for the devices, there's measure that is called the HRV, which is the heart rate variability. And when it is high, when it is low, it's showing that you are not able to manage stress properly. We need it to be high. When it's high, it suggests better stress resilience and better cardiovascular fitness. If it's very low, this is I will say like an indirect indicator that you are not managing stress in the proper way. That's like the one that we have.
And could you be more specific as to what are the HRV levels that would be considered healthy? And I know there's variations between men and women. There's also variations across different age groups. Would you be able to decipher that a little bit more for our listeners?
Yes. The numbers depends on the device and the age. Let's say this is from Hoop, and the age that it's 65 for men and 62 for women, but it depends on the age. So let's say around 60, and that it has variability and in sex and gender and age.
Would you say that the HRV level declines or shifts with age or not from what you've seen?
No, because the range is big.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are within the range, it doesn't matter the age. What changes is the average.
I see.
Yeah, same with VO2 max and all these things. That's why it's better. That's why I don't know the numbers. It's better to see the charts.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, yeah, but it
Okay.
should, like, if it decreases with age, if you are within the range of the age, it's fine. Same with
Okay.
the VO2 max and all these measurements.
If someone really feels mentally exhausted and overwhelmed, is experiencing brain fog, what would you recommend would be the first steps that they would need to do to rebalance their stress level and just regain also that mental clarity?
Well, brain fog has many different causes. What I've seen from my experience is that usually it's lifestyle related. And that's why it's so important to have this awareness of the different things that can be affecting our brain's performance. And this is what I usually tell to my patients because in the last 5 years, I've seen a shift in the consultations in neurology. Before, we had people with epilepsy, headaches, dementia, but now we are having young people, people in midlife with brain fog. And when we check, there's nothing wrong organically. Like there's no disease that we can diagnose, but people are feeling bad and they are feeling the brain fog and they are having the memory problems, and those things are things that are real. So the first point is awareness. The second point is understanding what could be going on. Ideally, we all should be going to the doctor at least once a year to check our normal and regular health check, preventative check. If there is something wrong with our bodies, these tests can show if there's a thyroid problem, if there's a vitamin problem, if there can be something organically that might be causing the brain fog. If all these things are good, then we focus on lifestyle. And the usual question is, are you stressed? And the answer is yes. So we need to find ways to manage stress. And for me, it's kind of funny and sad at the same time that whenever I ask people, how do you manage stress? People just laugh like, manage stress? What do you mean? Like, it's not even, we've normalized stress so much that we believe and feel that it's good to have it and it's fine that stress is a part of our lives, which is not true. If we feel stress, we have to manage it. First thing, it's always the easiest way I will say is exercise, movement. Whenever you feel overwhelmed, go out. I tell my patients, go out, walk. If you are able, go and run. If you are able, find a punching bag and do some boxing. This will make you feel instantly better. And then analyze why are you feeling that stress. Because if the stress is so high that it's making yourself hate your job, even there's people that hate their lives because of stress. And this is super sad because we are here to enjoy life, not to hate what we are doing every day. So we need to take a pause, analyze, think, and double think our lives. If a job it's that important to exchange our health for it, and usually the answer is no. So then we need to take an action and do something because we can always change careers. We can always change jobs, but we cannot change our brains. We have only one brain in this life and we need to protect it. So sometimes this goes just beyond stress and it turns into a whole life analysis to see how can I manage this at the deeper level.
I was wondering if you could share with us what the impact is on the brain when individuals actually have a clear purpose. From your research, do you find that those individuals actually experience less stress because they're more purpose oriented in terms of their professional and life activities?
Yes, yes. And this is something that research has shown multiple times that life purpose it's number one thing for our brains. If we don't feel happy with what we are doing, the brain is going to feel bad and you are going to get depression, anxiety, the stress is going to be higher because you don't have a why. Having a why makes the brain more resilient. And this is not only for brain health, this is for overall health. Whenever you have your why, you will be able to push through stress and to manage it and to manage life easier. But if your purpose it's only to wake up and go and do something that you don't like because you need the money, the brain gets bored and the tasks become automatic. And when you do things automatic and when you do things like a robot, your brain gets lazy, gets bored, and gets weak. So life purpose, it's one of the main components of brain health.
What is your advice in terms of finding your life purpose for those listening today that maybe are struggling to find theirs?
So there's this tool that it's called the Ikigai, which is a tool, like a Japanese tool to have a joyful life. And this tool tells us that we have to find something that we love, something that we are good at, something that we can be paid for, and something that the world needs. Put all these things together, we find our ikigai, which is our life purpose. If one of the pieces is missing, our life purpose can be wrong or can be going in the wrong direction. So it's always good to sit down, do this exercise, and see if you can find the common path, if you can find the ikigai. And what happens, or what I've seen, is that usually you get the answers when you do the exercise. And something that it's important is that our life purpose can change in the different stage of life. Life purpose is not something that is static or is something that is fixed. We can change our plans over time, and this will give us more purpose even because we can change and we can vary and we can do many things. And this is something, for example, that we see when people retired. They had a life purpose. Let's say it was job or it was having an identity inside a career, being a doctor, being a lawyer, being an engineer. And then retirement comes and life is over. There's nothing to do. I don't have any purpose. I don't work anymore. And many people get or show the signs of Alzheimer's disease as soon as they retire because they lose their life purpose. The invitation is that whenever we feel that our life purpose is over, we can find a new one. And when we find a new one, we will find ways to make it work and we will put our brains to work, and this will make the brain stronger and resilient.
Since you're talking about people going into retirement, one aspect as well that comes to mind is a reality of reduced social interactions. And there's so much research around this in terms of how important it is for the brain. What can you share with our listeners in terms of the impact of isolation or limited social interactions at the level of the brain?
Social isolation is one risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. It's written, science has shown it for the last 10 years that it is a risk factor. Our brains needs other people. If we are isolated, it's as bad as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Even if you are super healthy, you don't smoke, you don't drink, but you also don't have any friends and any connection, you are adding risk to your brain because the brain needs other people. And the good thing is that it needs other people doing silly things. You don't need to be in a super complex group or community analyzing super complex books or doing. No, if you have a meeting with your friends and you laugh out of loud, if you are having fun, if you are talking to others and meeting new people in silly stuff, still you are doing the work for your brain. And the thing is that, and it's a problem, no, that nowadays people get attached to the phones and to the devices, and we are losing this ability to connect with other humans. And this is something that we need to be aware of. All these things that I talk about, for me, I always say that awareness is the first thing at any age. Because even for me, Sometimes, I don't know, I go into an elevator and instead of smiling to the other person and instead of trying to build a connection, it doesn't mean, it doesn't need to be a new friendship, but a connection, a human connection. What do? We look at the phone and we avoid to look at people. And you see this in everywhere, in the waiting rooms, in the airports, everywhere. People are just focusing on the, even couples, families in the restaurants. You see that each one is focusing on the phone. So if we are aware that this is bad and that this is taking our human connection, we can try to do something about it. Imposing rules on with our friends, with our families. No phones while we are eating. No phones while we are watching a movie. 2 hours free of phones. Rules. Because if we don't put rules, if we are not aware of the problem, we won't do anything, and humanity is going to be worse in the future.
Mm. Yes, and this brings me to the topic of AI. What do you believe AI is potentially doing to the human brain for those that are using it extensively, whether it's for productivity reasons or for coaching, for connection? What are your thoughts on the ultimate power of AI on our human brain?
AI, it's such a powerful tool, but we need to be very careful on how we use it. Because what we are doing with AI is that we are getting lazy and the AI it's getting intelligent because we are giving all the information. Before, if you had a question or if you want to research something, you will need to go to different sources, no? And you will need to do your own summary and you will need to take your ideas and do the synthesis of those ideas. Now you put the topic in the AI and it makes the summary for you, and you don't read further and you just read the summary of the AI. And using AI like this, it's going to make us less intelligent. And actually, there was a paper last year that was showing that our IQ reduces when we use AI. But if we use it as a tool to amplify our ideas, to amplify our points of view, it can be very helpful and it can help us to do things faster than before. So again, it's awareness on how we use it. The other thing is that you mentioned it, people are using it as coaches or as a therapeutic tool, and that is bad because we are losing the human connection that we were talking about. But the problem is that the health systems push us into this stage that we are now, because I've seen this in different countries. You cannot go to a psychologist, to a psychiatrist, and have a 20-minute appointment, a 30-minute appointment, and have your problems solved. This is impossible. You need connection, you need longer time to establish a relationship between the patient and between the therapist. If that doesn't happen and the doctor has 20 patients to see the same day, the psychologist has 30 patients, that connection won't happen. People will hate the doctors, will hate the therapist. They will say, oh no, this doesn't work. Psychiatrists, they don't listen to us. Psychologists, they don't listen. And they will prefer to go with the AI, which is not good because it's not the same. We are losing the human connection.
Thank you so much for that valuable insight. And if we now look at the brain and joy, what would be the recipe, in your view, as a doctor, as a neurologist, in terms of how we can live more joyfully?
How can we live more joyfully? Okay, for me, and I always try to tell this to all the people around me, my patients, my family, and I try to apply it to myself, is we don't need to take life too seriously. Nothing it's worth our health. Not job, not relationship. Nothing in life should be that serious to take away our happiness. If something is taking away this happiness, just move on and go to another place, look for another person, look for another job. Your brain will help you to change. your brain will adapt if you let it. But if you let yourself to sink into misery, into sadness, into all these bad negative thoughts, you will stay there and your brain is not going to help. So my secret for joy is that one. Don't take anything too seriously. You can always change, you can always adapt, and your brain can always help you to do so.
I love that. Are there any other specific topics that you think would be important for us to discover as it relates to brain health that we didn't cover until now?
I think we cover like a good amount of that topic. I just can't say enough that the lifestyle is super important for our brains. We don't understand how important it is to move our bodies, to eat good for our brain, to give our brains proper fuel, to don't feed our brains with junk food, with processed food, with chemicals. This is not good, and to enjoy life and to manage stress as much as we can. If we move, if we eat well, if we manage stress, and if we try to be happy, our brains are going to be healthy, strong, and resilient.
Love that. And if there would be one challenge you could give our listeners for this week so they can build a healthy brain, what would that challenge be?
The step count. If your step count is below 5,000, try to increase it by 1,000 steps this week. Go from whatever you are to extra 1,000. And next week, 1,000 until you reach the magical number of 10,000 steps a day.
Amazing. Dr. Alejandra, it's been an immense pleasure to speak with you today. Thank you so much for all the wisdom you have shared.
Thank you for having me in your podcast.